53 days. That's how long Nancy Guthrie has been gone. 84 years old, heart condition, daily medication, taken from her home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona in the early hours of February 1st, and not seen since. 53 days since her pacemaker went silent. 53 days since her blood was found on the front porch of the home she loved. 53 days since whoever took her disappeared into the dark and walked away clean. And now, after 53 days of carefully worded press conferences, of officials saying everything except what the evidence is screaming, of a family forced to grieve in silence, someone who actually knows how this investigation works just said something that cannot be taken back. This is not a video about hope, it's about what the evidence demands we say out loud. But first, a necessary word. Everything you're about to hear is drawn from publicly reported information, named expert analysis, and direct statements from credentialed law enforcement professionals. No individual has been charged, accused, or convicted in connection with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. The theories discussed reflect the professional opinions of named analysts and should not be taken as confirmed fact. If you have information about this case, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Now, let's talk about what's really going on. To understand why what just happened matters, you need to know who Rick Castigar is. Castigar spent 46 years inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department. 4.5 decades. He rose to become its undersheriff, second in command, and for 37 of those years, the man now running the Nancy Guthrie investigation, Sheriff Chris Nanos, worked directly under him. Not a colleague, not a peer, Castigar was his boss. The man who spent nearly 4 decades watching how that sheriff operates eventually retired, and then he started watching this investigation, and what he saw troubled him deeply. On March 23rd, day 51, Rick Castigar sat down with News Nation correspondent Brian Enton on Brian Enton Investigates. What followed was the most significant public statement made about this case since it began. But to understand the full weight of what Castigar said, you need to know what he believes went wrong, because he didn't just offer a theory about Nancy, he laid out what he believes was a cascade of failures that started on the very first night. According to Castigar, this investigation made a critical error almost immediately. In those first hours, he told Enton,
initially, the case was handled as though this was an elderly woman who walked away from her home. That was the initial response for the first, perhaps 18, 24 hours or so. And that did involve a search. There were search and rescue components on the ground, some on foot, some on horseback, and of course the helicopter. That didn't really find anything, but as soon as the sheriff's department saw the initial evidence, and now we have the luxury 7 weeks out to understand what that is, it became very clear, at least to me, that this was a very sophisticated abduction.
And then he went further. He went on the record about Sheriff Nanos himself.
I know him. What I was told is he's a bully by many people who would come to me and personally relate, look, Rick, the guy works for you, he's patronizing you, but he's a bully to all of his subordinates. I didn't believe that until I went to work for him, until he became the sheriff and I was his number 2. And then I became strongly aware of the type of egocentric individual he is, how vindictive he is, and how vain he is.
He told Enton that Nanos was so fixated on projecting control that he failed to properly collaborate with the FBI from the start. That while evidence sat waiting to be processed, Nanos was, in Castigar's assessment, more focused on appearing in front of cameras than coordinating with federal investigators. He said deputies inside the department are whispering that this has become an ego case, that Nanos's long-standing grudge against the FBI, dating back more than a decade to a previous investigation, has poisoned the kind of collaborative relationship a case of this magnitude demands. And then there's the DNA. Evidence collected from this crime scene was sent to a private lab, not directly to Quantico, not to the FBI, which operates one of the most sophisticated forensic DNA laboratories on the planet, with resources no private lab can come close to matching. The DNA from Nancy Guthrie's porch did not go there first. Let that sink in. And then, Brian Enton asked him directly, what does he think happened to Nancy Guthrie? Rick Castigar, 46 years in the department, former direct superior of the sheriff now running this case, didn't hesitate.
So my theory is that she's passed.
Not missing, not still in Mexico, not alive somewhere to be found. Passed. He went further.
My theory is that they have nothing, they being the perpetrators, really have nothing with which to bargain any further. And what they may have done with her, I don't know.
That sentence is the key to everything that follows, because it tells us exactly how Castigar reads this crime. It wasn't random. It wasn't opportunistic. This was a kidnapping executed with a specific goal. And somewhere along the way, that goal became unreachable. And when the goal became unreachable, Nancy Guthrie became a liability. Here is how Castigar reconstructs what he believes happened. Multiple people were involved. This was not a lone actor improvising in the dark. The signal jamming, the deliberate camera avoidance, the prior reconnaissance of the home, the precise timing, all of it points to coordination, to planning, to a team that had done its homework before February 1st ever arrived. His theory is that Nancy was transported across the border into Mexico, not to kill her, not initially, to keep her alive long enough to use his leverage, to negotiate, to ransom, to extract something of significant value from a family with considerable means and a nationally recognized face. But here is where the theory becomes a reckoning. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She had a heart condition. She required daily medication that Sheriff Nanos himself stated on the record at a press conference on February 2nd was something she needed every 24 hours or it could be fatal. Not dangerous, not complicated, fatal. That was the sheriff's own word. So Castigar's theory is this: whoever took her may have had every intention of keeping her alive. They needed her alive. She was worthless to them dead. But the logistics of keeping an 84-year-old cardiac patient alive in a clandestine location while managing the heat of a nationally publicized FBI investigation became impossible to sustain. And when it became impossible, the bargaining chip ceased to exist. And once the bargaining chip was gone, once there was nothing left with which to negotiate, there was no longer a reason for this to end any other way than the way Castigar believes it ended. Here is something Sheriff Nanos said that has not received nearly enough attention. In an interview with NBC Nightly News, Nanos stated on the record that
we believe we know why he did this, and we believe that it was targeted, but we're not 100% sure of that.
Investigators believe they know why Nancy Guthrie was targeted. He used that word specifically, targeted, and he said they believe they know the motive. And then he didn't tell us what it was. What he did say was this, and this is the line that should follow you out of this video.
And so it'd be silly to tell people, yeah, don't worry about it. You're not his target. Don't think for a minute that because it happened to the Guthrie family, you're safe. No, keep your wits about you.
Don't think for a minute that because it happened to the Guthrie family, you're safe. No, keep your wits about you. Read that carefully. That is not what a sheriff says if he believes this was a random crime of opportunity. That is not what he says if he thinks this was a burglary that spiraled out of control. That is what a sheriff says when he believes the perpetrator has a profile, a method, and possibly a motivation that extends well beyond this single household. So what was the motive? Navas won't say. He has repeatedly stated that disclosing the investigative theory would compromise the integrity of the case, and that is a legitimate reason to stay silent. The problem is that silence at 53 days stops feeling like strategic caution. It starts feeling like a department that has a theory it cannot prove and an investigation that has stalled. So we turn to the people who will say what official law enforcement cannot. Former FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas spoke to Yahoo News and said something that should fundamentally recalibrate how you think about this case. The ransom theory, he said, is appearing less and less likely. His reasoning isn't emotional, it's statistical and operational. Kidnappings for ransom in the United States have decreased sharply over the years. There are too many ways to get caught, too many forensic threats, too many ways a ransom demand becomes an evidence trail leading directly back to whoever made it. And if ransom was ever the motive here, there was a window. The family made public pleas. Savannah stood in front of cameras and said they would pay. The FBI set up infrastructure to receive communications. The reward climbed past $1 million. Every channel was open. Nothing came back. No proof of life, no credible contact. The ransom notes that surfaced through TMZ and local outlets were either hoaxes or dead ends. One man in California was arrested for sending fraudulent ransom texts and was not connected to the case in any way. So if it wasn't ransom, what was it? Trombitas offered 3 possibilities. The first, revenge, specifically revenge of some kind or anger. The second, something connected to the family's profile, their wealth, their visibility. And the third, the one that should genuinely unsettle you. He called it a third purpose we're just not even aware of yet. A third purpose, something outside the conventional frameworks investigators reach for first, something that requires an entirely different map to understand. Someone planned this with extraordinary precision. They knew the house, they knew the cameras, they knew the gate, they knew her medication schedule, they knew her name. And we still don't know why. On March 19th, day 47, former Detective Morgan Wright appeared on Brian Enton Investigates. In what he said, on its surface, sounds clinical, procedural even, but follow the logic all the way to where it leads, and it becomes one of the most direct and devastating statements anyone has made about this case. Wright is the CEO and founder of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases. He spent 18 years in state and local law enforcement as a state trooper and detective. He has worked cases that others abandoned. He knows how investigations die. He knows what experienced investigators are thinking when they won't say it on camera. And what he said was this.
At some point, you have to realize it's not a missing person anymore. We have to realize Nancy was 84 years old, cardiac compromise.
Not emotionally, not as a surrender, as a tactical investigative reclassification. Because here is what that distinction actually means in the field.
If I'm looking for a missing person, then if I'm up in the Catalina foothills or the Sonoran Desert there, I'm not looking for anything out of place. I'm just going, oh, this case is going on, but it's a missing person, as opposed to when we have a no-body homicide.
Something else entirely. You are reading the landscape differently. You are examining disturbances in the soil. You are identifying areas that don't match their surroundings. You are moving through that terrain not as a search zone, but as a burial environment. And Wright was explicit about what that means in practical terms for this case.
When we have a no-body homicide, we're looking for clandestine grave sites, open grave sites, concealed grave sites, things that when you're out walking in the foothills, you need to be looking for these kind of things.
We have to start looking for grave sites, clandestine grave sites, open grave sites, concealed grave sites. Let that sentence fully arrive before you move past it. Those are not the words of procedural caution. Those are not the words of someone leaving room for hope. Those are the words of a man with nearly 2 decades in law enforcement who has watched how these cases resolve. and who is telling anyone willing to listen exactly what he believes the search needs to become. He framed it around what he believes went wrong with the abduction itself. His analysis was direct. This was a targeted abduction that failed, not a burglary that escalated, not a random violent crime, a premeditated, operationally sophisticated abduction, one where the specific logistics required to execute it, the planning, the coordination, the multiple-person operation, all of it pointed toward a goal that collapsed at the most critical moment. Because as Wright put it, the whole purpose of an abduction is to take someone you can ransom, someone you can use, someone whose life has negotiating value. And if she died, his words, then that is precisely why you stop treating this as a missing person case. The abduction went wrong, the leverage was lost, and the people who had just committed a federal crime carrying potential life sentences were left with a decision to make. The decision they apparently made is why Rick Castigar said what he said on day 51. Now I want you to listen to Savannah Guthrie's own words. Not a law enforcement analyst, not a former detective or an undersheriff or an FBI consultant. A daughter, a woman who has spent 53 days not knowing where her mother is or what was done to her. On February 24th, 24 days after her mother disappeared, Savannah made a video. And in that video, she said this: "We also know that she might be lost, and she may already be gone. She may have already gone home to the Lord that she loves and is dancing in heaven with her mom and her dad and with her beloved brother Pierce and with our daddy. If this is what is to be, then we will accept it, but we need to know where she is." Don't move past that too quickly. Not the prayer, not the faith, which is real and which is not ours to diminish. Look at the architecture of those sentences. If this is what is to be, not if the worst happens, not if investigators fail. If this is what is to be, past conditional, the framing of something she has already considered the likelihood of, something she has already begun to make peace with.
And then, we need to know where she is. Not we need her back, not we believe she is alive, not we are praying for her safe return. We need to know where she is. Location, not rescue, a place, not a homecoming. And then, just 3 days ago, the Guthrie family issued their most recent statement, signed by Cameron and Christine, Annie and Tommaso, Savannah and Michael. And in that statement, they wrote this: "We cannot grieve. We can only ache and wonder. Our focus is solely on finding her and bringing her home. We want to celebrate her beautiful and courageous life, but we cannot do that until she is brought to her final place of rest." Her final place of rest. Not her home, not her bed, not back to the family who misses her. Her final place of rest. These are not the words of a family that believes their mother is alive. These are the words of a family that has already begun to reckon with what they cannot yet say out loud, and is asking the world to help them find not a person, but a place where she can finally be laid to rest with dignity. That is where this family is, 53 days in. Now look at the physical evidence of what happened on that porch, because this piece of the framework changes everything. Nancy Guthrie's home had a security gate, not a decorative gate, not a screen door, a Diablo wrought iron security gate, heavy, reinforced, engineered specifically to prevent forced entry. To breach something like that, you need tools, you need force, you need time, and you generate noise, the kind of noise that triggers alerts, wakes neighbors, and leaves unmistakable evidence behind. The gate was not breached. There is no evidence it was damaged, no pry marks, no broken hardware, no signs of force whatsoever. The gate was opened from the inside. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, heart condition, limited mobility, alone in her home at 2 in the morning, walked to that gate and opened it herself. Why? That is the question that unlocks everything else, because the answer to that question tells you something critical about whoever was standing on the other side. Think through the possibilities. Someone called to her through the door. Someone knocked with enough urgency to pull her out of bed. Someone said something or showed her something that made her feel safe enough or concerned enough to physically approach that gate and release it. A voice she recognized, a name she knew, a face perhaps glimpsed through a side window that she associated not with danger but with safety. Or a scenario some analysts have raised based on the evidence, that she wasn't approached by a stranger at all, that whoever appeared at her door was someone whose presence there, at that hour, did not immediately trigger alarm. Because here is the reality. If a stranger knocks on your door at 2 in the morning, an 84-year-old woman with a reinforced security gate does not open it. She does not walk toward the door. She calls her children. She calls 911. She stays inside. But Nancy walked toward that door. And her blood ended up on the porch outside the gate, which means the confrontation happened after she opened it, after she stepped toward whoever was waiting on the other side. Now consider what that means for everything that followed. A plan that was built around a certain degree of cooperation, a door that opened, and then a confrontation that escalated beyond whatever that plan originally called for, and then a realization on the part of whoever had just pulled Nancy Guthrie through that gate that she had seen something she couldn't unseen, heard something, recognized something. Because once that recognition happened, if it happened, there was no version of this that ended with Nancy Guthrie being returned safely to her doorstep. She could speak. She knew something. Whatever she saw or heard in those 40 minutes, the window between the doorbell camera going dark at 1:47 and her pacemaker going silent at 2:28, meant that releasing her was not a choice the perpetrators could afford to make. 40 minutes inside that house. Not 5, not 10, 40. Long enough for a plan to unravel. Long enough for decisions to be made that could never be unmade. This is where we are. Rick Castigar, 46 years inside the department currently investigating this case, once the direct superior of the sheriff now running it, says his theory is that Nancy Guthrie has passed. Morgan Wright, CEO of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases, 18 years in law enforcement, says this is no longer a missing person case, that investigators need to stop searching for a living person and start looking for grave sites. Harry Trumbitis, former FBI special agent, says ransom is appearing less and less likely, that the motive may be revenge, maybe anger, or maybe something we haven't even found a name for yet. The family itself, the people who knew Nancy Guthrie better than anyone alive, issued a statement this week that did not ask for her return. It asked for her final place of rest. And Savannah Guthrie, in her own voice, in her own words, said she may already be gone. Nobody close to this investigation is saying Nancy Guthrie is alive and coming home. They are saying, find where she is. They are saying, change what you're looking for. They are saying, the clock that mattered has already run. 53 days, no arrest, no confirmed motive, no remains, no justice. Just a family that cannot grieve, a department under fire, a case that the people who know it best are describing in terms no one wants to say out loud, but that the evidence has been demanding for weeks. Nancy Guthrie deserves better than this. Her family deserves answers, and whoever is responsible deserves to be found. If you have any information about this case, anything at all, the FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can remain completely anonymous. A reward of more than $1 million remains unclaimed. Someone knows something. And if you are that someone, a family is begging you to speak. A final note. Everything presented in this video reflects publicly available reporting and the professional opinions of named analysts. No individual has been charged or convicted in connection with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. This video does not constitute a determination of Nancy Guthrie's status.